Now, there are a lot of very important clans in Naruto. There's the Uchiha, the Aburame, the Hyuga, but there is one clan that has the most importance and rises above all the other previous clans I just listed, and that clan would be the Senju. Considered to be one of the strongest clans in Naruto's entire history, they were almost solely responsible for the creation of Konoha. They're also one of the oldest ninja clans in the history of Naruto, drawing their roots all the way back to Hashirama himself. And yet, as a clan, they draw the most question marks out of any clan I've listed, mostly because where are they? But before we get to figuring out any of these question marks, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you really like me getting rid of question marks in any anime, that's Hunter x Hunter, that's AOT, that's Demon Slayer, that's Naruto, guys, please hit the join button for me. Become a member of the Weeb Alliance over here on YouTube. You'll be getting 3 additional videos from me a month on top of cool badges, emotes, and member shoutouts at the end of every video. So the Senju. Where did they originate? How did they become so strong? Why do they have beef with the Uchihas? And why are they not around in Konoha anymore? All of these are really good questions, and we're gonna answer every single one of them in a little bit. But for the moment, let's start this video in the way that we usually start these videos, at the beginning. How did the Senju clan originate, and why did they enter the Warring States period? Well, to talk about that, we're gonna have to jump about 2,000 years into the past. Specifically, at the moment Hashirama died. You see, Hashirama lived his entire life, walking around the earth giving people ninshu. Essentially, chakra is made up of 2 different things, your spiritual power and your physical power. Physical power is things like muscles and endurance, while spiritual power is ninshu. Think of it as the giant cosmic wishy-washy wave that connects all living things. Once you learn ninshu, you learn how to tap into the greater consciousness of the entire earth. And therefore, if everything on earth is capable of using ninshu, everything on earth is interconnected. And this is exactly what Hashirama wanted, an interconnected world brought together through a greater collective consciousness. That is how he foresaw peace. But he got old, and giving ninshu to every single thing on earth is tough. So he needed to find somebody who was going to continue his work, and that needed to be one of his 2 sons, either Indra or Ashura. Only problem is these 2 sons were drastically different. Ashura was a lot like Hashirama, believing that everybody needed to come together in an era of peace, while Indra was more about ruling with an iron fist. So when Hashirama on his deathbed chose Ashura to be the inheritor of his will, Indra started what would be called later on as the cycle of hate. Essentially, he hated Ashura for being selected by Hashirama, and swore in that moment that his spawn would fight Ashura's spawn until the day their spawns disappeared, thus starting the Warring States period. You see, Indra and Ashura were different in more ways than just ideology. Indra inherited Hashirama's eyes, while Ashura inherited his chakra, and therefore their respective clans had those respective traits. However, Indra didn't inherit the Rinne Sharingan, he just inherited the Sharingan. And Ashura didn't inherit Sage of 6 Paths chakra, he just inherited a lot of it. A lot of chakra, that is. So the Senju and the Uchiha, as the respective clans would become, were destined to fight for the entirety of history. Because as continual reincarnations of Indra and Ashura happened to keep popping up, the cycle of hate continued. And the cycle of hate is largely propagated by Indra's side, the Uchihas, because their abilities are driven by hate. In order to awaken a Sharingan, you need to be in a tragic situation. In order to get an EMS, you need to steal your brother's eyes. But the Senju, aka Ashura's side, are said to get their power from love. And thus the Uchiha and the Senju represent yin and yang. So we know very clearly what the Uchihas got. They got the Sharingan, but we only vaguely know what the Senju got. They just got a lot of life force and a lot of chakra. So what did they do with that? Well, here's actually a lesser known fact about the Senju. They are referred to as the clan with 1,000 skills. Why, you ask? Well, because instead of specializing on one thing like the Uchiha with their Sharingan, the Senju decided to specialize in everything, focusing on mastering Taijutsu, Genjutsu, and Ninjutsu. And this is how they actually acquired their name, Senju, which literally translates to either 1,000 hands or 1,000 skills. So the Uchihas are a bit like a closing pitcher in baseball who's got a really good fastball. Think Aroldis Chapman. While the Senju are more like an incredible starting pitcher who has to have a curveball and a slider and a fastball, but may not throw as hard as that closer. And because of this, they were kind of eternal rivals trying to figure out who had the right approach. Genetic inheritance that led to massive power, or spreading yourself very thin but figuring a lot of things out in order to counter that said genetic inheritance. Not that the Senju didn't and also have the genetic inheritance of a very long life and an incredible amount of chakra. But what's wild is that the Uchihas in the Senju during Hashirama and Modera's era don't even know why they're warring. Yes, obviously Indra and Ashura's disagreement about how to best unify a group of people, either that being love or power, is what kicked it off, but Modera and Hashirama don't know that. To them, the reason that they're warring is because they've always been warring. And the system of the Warring States period also did not help in this. You see, the Senju and the Uchiha weren't just walking onto a battlefield every day to fight each other. That's a common misconception. They were being hired. Let's say you're a small village and you want to take over another small village. You would hire either the Senju or the Uchiha to take over that small village for you. Let's say you're the small village about to be taken over, you hire the other group to fight them, and then boom, Senju Uchiha battle. It's just that the Senju and the Uchiha were the best fighters of this era, so they were top of the line people to hire. But the Senju technically had help. You see, the Senju are very closely related to the Uzumaki, and this is evidenced by the fact that both the Senju and the Uzumaki have incredibly long lives and a ton of chakra. We don't know if the Uzumaki spun out of the Senjus or if there was just different children of Ashura that split off to different areas. But what we do know for sure is that the two clans were very close, often intermarrying, because in Naruto, nothing says clan unity like marrying your relatives. This would most clearly be seen when Hashirama married Mito Uzumaki. And this was a political move done to solidify the relationship between the two clans. Because essentially, the relationship was just that if the Senju needed something sealed using Fuin Jutsu, they would call the Uzumakis. Because the Uzumakis had Reaper Death Seal and Adamantite Chains and all these other ridiculously powerful Fuin Jutsus, including the 8 trigram seal that Minato uses on Naruto's belly to hold Kurama in him, that Kushina actually taught him. Fun fact. Warring for thousands of years gets old, especially if you don't know what you're fighting for. Hell, even if you do know what you're fighting for, if the fight started 2,000 years ago, that's not my problem. But war propagated in the way that war propagates. You killed my brother, I kill yours. But even this hate that's born into every generation through loss eventually isn't enough to drive a fight. And with Hashirama and Modera's generation came two people in Hashirama and Modera who had had about enough of it. Hashirama and Modera met one time off the battlefield and became friends. They waxed poetic about what a world without war would be like and how they're scared that their little siblings are gonna die on the battlefield, mostly dreaming of a place where children didn't have to fight in wars. However, unfortunately, these were just dreams, specifically for Modera. See, Hashirama wanted to use his relationship to his father and Modera's relationship to his father in order to stop the fighting. But Modera thought that they were too young to get anything done, so he turned away from these dreams. And because of this, Hashirama and Modera met each other on the battlefield for years. They were both the next respective leaders of their own clans. And eventually they achieved just that, both becoming the leaders of their own respective clans. So Hashirama, being a reincarnation of Ashura who wants to spread unity through peace and love, came to Modera trying to broker a peace deal, which was mostly driven by Toby Rama. You see, both Hashirama and Toby Rama had lost their two younger brothers, both of whom hadn't seen the age of 12. But it was Toby Rama who told one of his younger brothers after the death of his first younger brother that in order to find peace between them and the Uchihas, they were gonna have to forgive the injustices the Uchihas had done to them, because they themselves had done as many injustices to the Uchihas as they had done to them. Essentially, forgive and forget. And he passed this ideology along to Hashirama. Now, with the two top people, both Hashirama and Toby Rama, wanting peace in the Senju, it was the perfect time to make peace, especially when you consider the fact that the Uchihas were also growing towards the sentimentality of peace. So Hashirama brought the idea to Modera, and Modera made his first mistake of many. Modera identified that the majority of his clan wanted peace, but he wanted to do one more show of supremacy against the Senju. So one last time, the Senju and the Uchiha met on the battlefield, and on that very same battlefield, Modera was defeated. You see, the reason Modera was defeated is because this time both Toby Rama and Hashirama were able to fight him. This is because Toby Rama had killed Modera's little brother Izuna in battle before. See, Toby Rama was not only a genius, he very much encapsulated the 1,000 skills part of being a Senju. Instead of just focusing on mastering Genjutsu and Taijutsu and Ninjutsu, Toby Rama focused on creating his own techniques, specifically Shadow Clone, Flying Raijin, and Edo Tensei. Edo Tensei in a much simpler form than we see in Naruto. Essentially, Tobirama would just bring back any ninja, not the strongest of the generations. And since they had immortal bodies, he would make these bodies out of paper bombs. Well, he would have the bodies turn into paper bombs. But since these bodies have infinite regeneration, as they explode from the paper bombs, they're also regenerating, causing an infinite chain of explosions that he used to wipe out many Uchiha. But he also created Flying Raijin, which allowed him to use the Flying Raijin slice against Izuna. Essentially, Tobirama wanted to make a jutsu that was fast enough that even the Sharingan wouldn't be able to stop it. And he did that. And in this way, Tobirama perfectly encapsulates what the Senju stand for. Being well versed in everything often beats singular focus. That's why I talk about Demon Slayer and AOT and Hunter x Hunter sometimes. But back to the final battle. Now we have Tobirama and Hashirama against Modera. And in this scenario, Modera loses. And Tobirama wants to kill Modera. It's not that he doesn't trust the Uchihas, he doesn't trust Modera, because Modera had actively moved against the will of the Uchiha, opting for hate and power over peace when his own clan was looking for peace. It's not that Tobirama held ill will against Modera for murdering his brethren, he just established that Modera was not good for peace. But Hashirama is a bit of a softie, and he asked Modera as he laid on the ground about to be stabbed by Tobirama how they could end the fighting. And Modera insisted that Hashirama give up his own life in order to pay back for the death of Izuna and many of his other brothers. Hashirama, being a person who believed that unity came through peace and therefore this was an avenue to achieve peace, agreed. You see, Hashirama had already been fighting for peace in that battle alone, willing to put his life on the line in order to achieve a peaceful state. He was resolute to die in that battle, but dying here wouldn't change anything as long as it achieved peace. Seeing Hashirama willing to give up his own life in order to achieve peace finally shook Modera out of whatever bloodlust haze he was in, and he agreed for peace. And it's at this point that they agreed to make Konoha, a village where both the Senju and the Uchiha could live together in peace and in massive prosperity, considering the fact that they were the two strongest clans in the land. This unity wasn't going to last for long, and there was a multitude of reasons as to why. Remember how I said the Senju had friends in the Uzumakis? Well, that wasn't the only place they had friends. Well, at least it wouldn't be for long. You see, after the formation of Konoha, many other clans came out of the woodwork in order to live in this prosperous and peaceful village. Most notably, the Nara and the Sarutobi. You see, the Nara clan was mostly doctors who studied medicines and herbal remedies. They hunted down the deer in the Land of Fire in order to harvest them for their deer antlers, which they used in their medicines. And the Sarutobis were a very powerful clan that just happened to live in the Land of Fire as well and wanted to move over to Konoha once it popped up. So now the Uchihas and the Senju and a couple of other smaller clans like the Sarutobis and the Naras are living within the same walls. But the Senju have an existing relationship with a couple of these clans already, specifically the Uzumakis, who live in the Land of Whirlpools and not in Konoha, but have a lot of people from the Land of Whirlpools and Konoha at any given point. They need a leader. Hashirama, being the way that he is, wants it to be Modera. You see, Hashirama's not a power-hungry person. The best leaders in life aren't. Indra wanted to create unity through power, while Ashura wanted to create unity through love. And yet Ashura was chosen as the person to live out Hagoromo's will, and Hashirama was voted democratically to be the first Hokage by all the residents of the budding Konoha. And this is because those who should truly be in power shouldn't be people who want power. It seems like an oxymoron, but it's not. Those who are put in positions of power shouldn't be those who are trying to grab at as much power as they can. They should be people who people just like and agree with. The only reason there was a democratically held election in the first place, though, is because Tobirama said, let's put it up to a vote when Hashirama wanted Modera to be the first Hokage. And the fact that Modera had openly disagreed with his clan's wills to look for peace a couple of months ago, and that the Sarutobis, the Naras, and the Uzumakis also had votes in an existing relationship with the Senju, Hashirama was elected. Who better symbolizes the clan of 1,000 skills better than the Nara, who are a group of doctors who specialize in medical ninjutsu and just straight up ninjutsu and all have 200 IQs, or the Sarutobi, who align with the Senju's ideology so much that they basically have the will of fire tattooed onto their chest. So from the beginning, things were already skewing in the direction of the Senju, and that's exactly how Modera saw it. Remember, Modera wants power for himself and those around him. So Modera saw this as the first step in a long line of the Senju seizing supremacy over Konoha and suppressing the Uchiha, and got like really super upset over it. So really super upset over it that he actually left Konoha, caught the Nine Tails, and came back to fight Hashirama. You see, Modera had heard tale about a natural disaster that killed anything that came near it. A walking sentient beast that wanted nobody around it but had unbridled power. And he was like, okay, so that's how I get my leg up on Hashirama. So he used his Sharingan to put Kurama under his control and then came back to fight Hashirama, and then was subsequently killed by Hashirama. But that's all part of the Uchiha / Modera story, not the Senju. Because, well, Hashirama did become the leader of Konoha, the first one. In fact, he didn't want the Senju to become the ruling class. He never wanted that. In fact, we learned in Naruto chapter 626 that he figured it would be better for both the Uchiha and the Senju to focus on the wants of Konoha, not their clans. Hashirama didn't want there to be a Senju sect and a Uchiha sect in Konoha. He wanted the entire society to just be Konohanians. But even though that's what he wanted, unfortunately, what happened was closer to what Modera figured would happen. Yes, of course, technically Hashirama and Tobirama dissolved the Senju clan. They said, instead of doing what the Uchihas are doing by closing their doors off to the world and only breeding within each other, let's open our doors up. Let's marry the Sarutobi. Let's marry the Uzumaki. Hashirama literally set the example for it. And by marrying outside of their own clan, eventually the Senju disappeared. I mean, they never truly disappeared, but as you marry outside of your own clan, your last name changes a lot. All female Senjus eventually became Sarutobis or Naras or Uzumakis or even Akamichis. But that wasn't the case for the Uchihas, who were all keeping their names because, you know, they loved their cousins. And this is why Konoha is so strong, so much stronger than all the other villages, because the Senju blood runs through almost every person in the village. And therefore they all have a little sliver of Ashura's life force and chakra. But even though Hashirama and Tobirama did this, like I said, what Modera feared came true. After Modera has been killed by Tobirama and Hashirama, well, I guess killed, Hashirama goes out and he captures 8 of the 9-tailed beasts. He got the idea from Modera, who managed to catch one of them. He then sold these tailed beasts. I mean, he wanted to give them away for free, but Tobirama was like, please get money for them. But yes, he sold these tailed beasts to the other villages that popped up wanting to be like Konoha. Yes, Konoha was the first ninja village, and all the other ninja villages saw what Konoha was doing and were like, good idea. But even after Hashirama gives away these tailed beasts to these other villages hoping to prevent a war still happens, a war in which Hashirama dies. And then Tobirama becomes Hokage. You see, to you and me, this makes a lot of sense. Tobirama is now the strongest person in the village by a long shot. He also was very fundamental and important in the formation of Konoha. I would say he's arguably the most important person in the formation of Konoha. But now, the only 2 leaders in Konoha's relatively short history have been Senju. Who's to say there wasn't a capable Uchiha who could have taken over after Hashirama? And yet, almost immediately, Tobirama is selected. And through what process, we actually don't necessarily know. You see, we know Hashirama is democratically elected, but every other Hokage just kind of becomes Hokage on a whim. Because mind you, there was no village elders at this point to choose who should be the next Hokage. But that's only 2 of the Hokages, right? That's not the end of the world. Then the 5th Hokage is also Senju. And every other Hokage who has served is directly tied to Hashirama in one way or the other. There's Hashirama, and then there's Tobirama, Hashirama's brother. And then when Tobirama dies in the First Great Ninja War, Hiruzen becomes the next Hokage. And not because anybody said they wanted Hiruzen, because Tobirama just selected him to be the Hokage because he was about to die. Hiruzen, who is a Sarutobi, who I've already said are highly tied to the Senju. And then there's Minato, who was trained by Hiruzen, when there was many other possible choices like Fugaku Uchiha. And then the 5th Hokage is Tsunade, a literal Senju. I mean, even if you count Danzo, is technically Hiruzen's best friend and also was under Tobirama. But in reality, the 6th Hokage is Kakashi, who was trained by Minato, the 4th Hokage. And then the 7th Hokage is Minato's son and Kakashi's student. All people tied to the Senju or people trained by them, passing down an ideology that Modera didn't agree with. And while this is largely the correct ideology, it is still exactly what Modera feared. creation of a super ruling class that only passes down leadership through their own direct ladder. So even though the Senju may not technically still exist in Konoha, their influence is still very much felt. In fact, in Konoha Hiden, a light novel just kind of about Konoha, we learn that the Senju are technically no longer active, whatever that means. Whether it be through the lineage of the Kage or the Will of Fire, which was created by the Senju are still very much present in spirit. And all it took was a man in Hashirama who was the physical reincarnation of both mentality and ability of Ashura. You see, because nobody in the entire history of the Senju embodied what Senju means more than Hashirama. You see, Hashirama and Tobirama both created jutsus of their own in order to broaden their horizons beyond what any Senju thought possible. From what we know, Hashirama created wood release. It's not a Senju specific ability, it's a Hashirama specific ability. And Hashirama even went a step further with his wood release, using it in a wide variety of ways to show off the breadth that he could achieve in terms of other jutsus he could pull off with just this one technique. I mean, he had wood golems, deep forest emergence, and most importantly, True Thousand Hands. You see, while True Thousand Hands is very clearly an homage to a Buddhist god who has 3 heads and 1,000 hands, it is also a reference to the Senju name, which I will remind you directly translates to either 1,000 skills or 1,000 hands. Hashirama made a jutsu that was the literal living embodiment of his clan's motto. And by unabashedly living by this motto, he brought people to him in terms of the Uzumaki, the Nara, the Sarutobi, and even the Uchiha that allowed them to create Konoha. And because they didn't focus on their clan, Konoha became their clan. And whether or not there's a Senju name slapped at the end of Konoha or not, their influence will be felt forever. And that's about everything we know about the Senju. Listen, if I was gonna be a member of one clan in Naruto, I would want it to be the Senju. What would you guys want to be in? Tell me in the comments below. And while you're down there, please like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. You know what? Modera's ideology is wrong, but so is Hashirama's. Not all unity can be brought about with peace, but not all unity can be brought about with power. There's a middle ground. And you know who stands directly in that middle ground? Toby Rama.